Hey guys, welcome back to the video. I just got to watch The Black Phone early, so in this video guys, my spoiler-free review. Finney Shaw is a shy but clever 13-year-old boy who's being held in a soundproof basement by a sadistic masked killer. When a disconnected phone on the wall starts to ring, he soon discovers that he can hear the voices of the murder's previous victims, and they are dead set on making sure that what happened to them doesn't happen to Vinny. So, The Black Phone. This movie is really great, but I definitely feel like there are just some core issues with it, and most of them surround the fact that I just wanted more of what we already got. But I do want to start off with some of the good things about this movie, and the biggest thing is probably the absolutely insane performances. This movie's cast overall is great. You have Ethan Hawke as the grabber, and though I have some issues with this character overall, which I'll touch on a little bit later, overall he's still an absolutely phenomenal performer in this film. We also have Mason Thames as Finney, Madeline McGraw as his sister, and Jeremy Davis as their abusive father. Now Mason Thames is easily the standout from this movie, and I can't wait to see more of what he does in the future, as I haven't really seen many of his past projects, but as a whole, Mason Thames definitely carries this thing, and he is really great. At times, a child actor that's in the main role can really make or break the movie, but in this movie, both of the leads, Mason Thames and Madeline McGraw, are both absolutely phenomenal. I had no issues with any of their acting or any of their character portrayals. I also think that Madeline McGraw is absolutely great. She has great comedic timing, and as a whole, her character is super well utilized. I don't want to give too much away about the mystical aspect of this movie, but we do hear the victims' voices through this disconnected phone that are trying to help Finney escape. I'll talk about the mystical aspect a little bit more because that's kind of where my issues with this movie do come in. But before we get into that, I do want to say that I love this style of horror where we follow a group of kids. Well, more specifically in this movie, it's one kid that's helped by a bunch of other kids. I do really love this style of horror kind of surrounding these younger kids and this more coming of age version of a horror movie. Movies like It and It Too do it very well. It's also following this 80s style, but it also kind of relates us back to when we were kids, where there's this boundary, and if you pass that boundary, that's where stuff really starts to get scary. And this movie plays with that idea a lot. But that whole idea, in my opinion, isn't something that the movie takes to its full advantage, and that's my biggest problem with this movie. Like I said before, this is a great film overall, but the core aspects of this film that are kind of underwhelming in my opinion are those that aren't touched upon enough. The biggest thing for this is Ethan Hawke's the grabber, the actual main villain of this film. Though the grabber was scary and fear-inducing, sometimes I did feel like he was a little bit too mysterious, and at times the mysteriousness about his character works very well, and it makes his character a lot more unsettling. But as a whole, by the end of this film, I felt like I didn't have enough of an impact from his character because he was so mysterious. There were hints throughout this movie of him being somewhat of a sympathetic character, but there was nothing more to that. It felt like at times they were saying, oh, he won't do this, he won't go this far, he won't go that far, but he just wants to test how far the kids will actually go to get out of here. There are these smaller moments where I feel like they could have done way more with this character, or if anything, just explained more of what his intent was. He really just felt like there was a shell of a character in there. He had so much more potential, and I definitely wanted more Ethan Hawke because it's Ethan Hawke.
Ooh, the creepiest damn thing.
But it felt like he was just barely in the movie, and it felt like they didn't utilize the grabber as well as they could have, especially with the whole mystical aspect of this movie. And like I said before, they do a great job of implementing it into this movie. The movie's title is The Black Phone, and the dead kid's voices come out of this disconnected black phone. And so they do a great job of implementing this mysterious aspect, but it doesn't feel like they go all in. There's these cool and silly effects that go on with the dead characters through the phone, and they do a great job of exploring all that, but it just feels like they surface level touched it. There was all this potential with these characters having this phone-like voice as they're trying to explain to Finney how to get out of here, and all of these just different crazy well done elements overall, but it just felt like as a whole they didn't really go anywhere, or at least the direction that I wanted. But back to the grabber specifically, like I said again, it felt like Ethan Hawke was barely in this movie. He has more of an off-screen presence, more of this looming threat where it's like, if you go here, he'll he'll be here. If you do this, he'll do that. Like, we get explained all of that, but we never really get to see that fear. And that's maybe how I just personally get scared of things, is I kind of have to see the threat. I can't just hear about it. I can't just hear stories about the threat. Like, I need to see, like, okay, this guy is here and this is what he's done in the past. One of my favorite parts about this movie is how, as you learn more about these individual kids, you actually get to see parts of the kidnapping itself, but it feels like they just didn't touch on that enough for me. And I felt like if they did that a little bit more, I would have felt a little bit more impact with Ethan Hawke's The Grabber. But again, he is so mysterious that it just loses impact for me completely. And towards the end, there were some decisions that they made and some resolution ideas that they did that would have just been better for me if there was more character development. Not to say it was bad, it just didn't have as much impact as I wanted. I think the biggest way they could have fixed that is with the pacing overall of this movie. And as a whole, I definitely think the pacing is actually pretty good. It knows when to slow down, it knows when to take its time, it knows when to build up tension, and it's not just being stuck with this Finney kid underground. Like, you actually get to see a bunch of other cool elements of the story finally come together, and by the end it speeds up and it all pieces together and it works very, very well. But I will say the first 20 minutes of this movie is very, very weird. I think that they could have utilized the first 20 minutes of this movie way better. As I was watching the movie, I felt like the first 20 minutes were very necessary. It was a great setup for our characters and it really set the tone of this world that we're in, kind of giving us the fear of the grabber and all that kind of stuff. But now looking back, it definitely felt like those first 20 minutes were a bit of a drag. And I had this little idea of how they could have made it better. Now, there won't be spoilers here, but this might tell you what's not in the movie. I kind of wish that they spent those first 20 minutes of the movie actually setting up the grabber separately, kind of like those dual storyline movies where you kind of see the elements of the grabber instead of it just fading away and us not really getting to see the grabber. But then at a certain point, obviously those two stories collide when Finney gets taken away. I think that would have allowed for more context on the grabber and giving us more emotional impact towards the end of the movie, since we actually got a good enough setup for him as a whole. But overall, the pacing of this movie was not bad. And I think another thing that really will just set this movie apart in terms of just a regular horror film that's a low budget thing is the style of this film. Now, like I said before, it definitely has that coming of age horror style, but I'm talking visually. The shot composition of this movie is, dare I say, near perfect. And it's utilized so well because it adds even more suspense. And it's definitely silly at times. There's like these balloon effects that they do and these warping effects. And I think it works in the context of this film. And it's weird, but it definitely works. And the story overall, I think it's a very basic story, but it allows for that general eeriness and suspense that a horror movie has, which I can't really complain about. But I will also say there's a lot of story points that I just wanted a little bit more on. And I think it's because they set it up so well that I was like, okay, what's next? What's next? What's next? But they ended up just connecting it to the main story, which I can't really complain about, but I would have loved to see those other story points play out. Kind of things like the grabber's actual intent, the main character's family dynamic, because that was very interesting to me. And overall, this fantastical aspect of the movie, I wish they just touched on that a little more. As a whole, The Black Phone is a rock solid horror film, and there isn't much negative other than the fact that I just wanted more Ethan Hawke. And as a whole, it felt like there was more potential with this built up story. The style and performances, as well as the overall idea, are really, really good. And this one is well worth your time. Overall, I'm going to give Scott Derrickson's The Black Phone a solid 8 out of 10. If you've already seen or want to check out The Black Phone, let me know what you think of it in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.